Hello, class. Welcome back to U.S. History 2. This is the second lecture of the first unit, and it's about big business, and the subtitle is Robber Barons and Captains of Industry, which you should recognize by the end of, or by the start of this, because you've already received your summative assessment for this unit, which is arguing whether the entrepreneurs this time period were robber barons or captains of industry. So should be hopefully a really useful section as far as getting your final assessment for this unit done. The question you have to answer by the end of today is the one listed right here. How did big business shape the American economy during the late 19th century? So you get to use this and you get to use your notes from the other day to try to answer that question. So there's a couple charts that start off this presentation, basically just showing really what we're talking about in this unit with big business, or this section rather, with big business, which is about the acquisition of lots and lots of wealth by companies and individuals who own these companies. And so this chart shows basically by the time period we're talking about, the long Gilded Age in the upper left hand corner. Let's see. The richest Americans controlled about 46% of all the wealth in the country. And you can see by the far right, we're kind of in a similar situation now. So in a lot of ways, this is a very similar time period to what we're living through right now. Again, similar data. You can pause this video and take a closer look at these charts if you're interested. Yeah, let's see. This one is again more modern, and again, it's very, very similar to this time period of the late 19th century. So this cartoon here is titled "The Trust Magnate's View of the World," and the subtitle is "What a Funny Little Government." And so you can tell by his collar, and this is also, again, in that summative assessment packet that you have. This is John D. Rockefeller looking down at the White House, and he's a giant because his company is richer and more powerful than the U.S. government itself. He's poking at the president right there. All right, so the question of what a corporation is, and this is a short video of the presidential candidate Mitt Romney describing what a corporation is, and he describes pretty accurately. A corporation is a group of people who combine basically a company to avoid risking their own money if that company goes into business. So recently, there's been controversies about corporations and what other rights they have beyond not risking the money of individuals who invest into them, and they've ruled they have right to freedom of speech and various other rights, which ultimately involve spending money on political campaigns, and it's probably going to be a Supreme Court decision this term as well. So corporations try to maximize profits, and let me move my little picture here, by grabbing patents, by selling products as less than their competitors, increasing demand by advertising, and lowering their labor costs as much as they can. So this is pretty much just a way that companies work in general, but in big businesses in particular have bigger impacts when they do this. So this chart on the right is useful. And again, I recommend pausing and taking a quick look at it. So John D. Rockefeller is this gentleman photographed right here wearing the black leather gloves, wearing the top hat. And he is, by most historians' measures, the wealthiest man in history. His Standard Oil Company controlled 90% of U.S. oil production, and he worked with the railroad companies to basically prohibit his rivals from shipping into their oil. So, sure, you can start an oil company. Rockefeller can't stop you, but he can keep you from being able to send your oil anywhere. So, thousands and thousands of individuals lost their businesses. There's a lot of, he used spies, used extortion and blackmail to shut down businesses, and again, became extremely wealthy. There's a link in the presentation to a song by Woody Guthrie about one of his companies shooting miners in Colorado. It's called the Ludlow Massacre. And so was not above using armed guards to basically break strikes and that sort of thing. And he matters because, again, he was the wealthiest man probably in history. This is in Los Angeles, California, I believe. This is some oil derricks owned by the Standard Oil Company. And it's just worth taking a minute to look at and just thinking about what all this equipment was doing and how complicated of a process this is. It's a level of complexity the world hadn't had as far as energy was concerned. You go back and coal, yeah, sure, it comes out of the earth, but it's burned pretty much non-processed. Oil is a whole nother thing. Standard Oil was criticized, and this cartoon here is of the Standard Oil Company as an octopus. You can kind of see they didn't really know what octopus looked like clearly based on the drawing. You can see they're grabbing, various state capitals. These are people, this guy's like a clerk. Down in the corner, there's a couple businessmen. They're all being tangled up by Rockefeller's influence. This is the Rockefeller J.P. Morgan family tree, and this was published by journalists who were trying to expose how much power the Rockefeller Company had over the overall American economy. Oh, actually, I should go back. Standard Oil, this Rockefeller's company, exists as basically every gas station you've ever picked up gas from. Chevron's a descendant of Standard Oil. ExxonMobil is, ConocoPhillips, Dutch Oil, Shell, British Petroleum, and they were broken up into smaller pieces. And one of the next units we're going to be doing, and we'll discuss that later. Another one of these characters who's either considered a robber baron or a captain of industry is Andrew Carnegie. And he matters because he is kind of an example of what we discussed in section 1 of a rags to riches story. He's an immigrant from Scotland. He arrived in basically Pennsylvania as a young lad, would call himself a lad being Scottish, and got a job as a messenger boy. And then he was noticed for being super smart, and because he was, and he got a job working as a telegraph operator. And then he eventually makes his way to become the largest steel producer in the entire world, and the owner of U.S. Steel in the city of Pittsburgh, and basically made Pittsburgh into a city. The Bessemer process that was in Section 1 was one of the things that he adopted that allowed his company to become so large. And, he was an anti-imperialist, he was an author, and he firmly believed the wealthy had a duty to give away their money. So there's still like Carnegie Corporation that donate, you'll hear it if you listen to NPR, that you're constantly bankrolling it. Like Rockefeller, there's also some labor issues, including, shooting of workers. The Homestead Steel Strike is considered to be one of the most violent breaks of a strike of workers. There were unsafe conditions in a plant, according to the workers. Laborers were dying, and a private mercenary army was hired by Carnegie's second in command to break the strike. Many workers died. Carnegie was in Scotland at a golf course at the time, and it's still controversial who's to blame. So, cute dog there. So this is definitely going to be on any sort of quiz you take on this section, and it's just an important concept to get, and frankly, one that I always have to kind of go through with students, several times because it's a little counterintuitive in some ways. So this is the concept of different kinds of monopoly. So what a monopoly basically is a company that controls all of an industry. There's different ways it can be done. And so in the example that we'll just, use this example on the right-hand side, you have car manufacturing as an industry, for example. If you wanted to vertically integrate your car manufacturing industry, that would mean you would need to go vertical. So from the top to the bottom of this chart that we have right here. So you have to own the car dealerships. You'd have to own the garages. If it was, a Toyota, for example, and you were in the United States, you have to control the company that imported it to another country. You have to control the plant where the car was made. You have to control the rubber, plantations where the tire materials came from. You'd have to control the oil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's fairly less common. Rockefeller, his Standard Oil company, was this. They controlled the oil mines all the way to the refineries that turned them into things like gasoline. A horizontally integrated company is we control all of it. Kind of like in the board game Monopoly, if you have all your hotels and nobody else can build a hotel there, that's horizontal integration. So that's if you were the only car manufacturer in the entire United States, you would have horizontally integrated the car manufacturing industry. An example that you absolutely use, if you're looking at this on a computer, is cable companies. There's only one option in most towns. I think in Hatfield it's Comcast. And so that is an example of a horizontally integrated monopoly that exists. So this is not just something that happened in the past. So era defining debate. Again, this is what you have to write about by the end of this unit. Were the capitalists of this time period robber barons or were they captains of industry? So these are the definitions. This is a slide that you can come back to. The same information is also in your packet. If you think that the capitalists of this time period, so your Rockefellers, your Vanderbilts, your Carnegies, your JP Morgans, committed unfair business practices, corrupted the government, and mistreated their workers, you would call them robber barons. If instead Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Morgan, and others, should be looked up to because of their ingenuity, the new ideas they had, the new things they brought to the economy, the wealth that they got is, incredible. They were able to earn all this money and employ millions. That is a argument that these folks were captains of industry. So you're going to have to decide which of these two, angles on the same group of people you think is more valid. Here's a cartoon describing what a robber baron is. And so you have these trusts. The word trust is another word for monopoly from this time period, robbing the people of the United States with a factory in the background. People in this time period loved making cartoons that explicitly show you the social issues of the time, which is great for us. Here's another one. So this one is a boat. It's called the Protectors of Our Industry. So you might think this is about calling these folks captains of industry. But if you look more closely, their bodies are money bags. They're sitting on bags called Gould's millions. And there are men struggling to drown in the water, or not to drown in the water, with signs saying how much they earn a week comparatively to these wealthy folks. You may notice the hammer and the sickle in the water next to the words hard times. And that is absolutely a reference to communism and socialism, which is a new ideology in this time period. One of the last things we're going to look at here is the idea of social Darwinism and how it was applied to capitalism. A Yale professor named Charles Sumner adopted Darwin to Wealth and Society. If you remember from biology, the idea of survival of the fittest. The cartoon right here shows you this guy with a gold coin. He's, beating the guy with a silver coin. Gold beats silver. The wealthier are better, and that's why they're wealthier, is basically what the philosophy is. It justified existing economic conditions. Welfare programs for poor workers were thought to make them less fit to become rich later, because they would be violating basically evolutionary, necessity according to the believers of this philosophy. And again, the power of the rich was seen as evidence that they deserved to be wealthy. In spite of all this, the government began to take small steps into regulating companies as a public good. And the Interstate Commerce Commission was created basically to specifically regulate the railroads. And the Sherman Antitrust Act was created to break monopolies up into smaller companies, although it did not really happen until about 20 years later. So we're going to have to wait a couple units before that becomes really relevant. And that's it. So thank you folks for listening, and good luck on writing that short response.